My parents tried to hijack my honeymoon and make me their legal shield. 3 days after I said I do to the love of my life, my parents tried to get me to sign away my newlywed bliss, not with wedding advice, but with legal documents. They wanted me to put my name on a lease, effectively becoming their financial shield against a business fallout. And when I said no, they didn't just ask again. They weaponized guilt, family loyalty, and even my new husband against me. I, 27F, just got married to my partner Noah after 5 years together. The wedding itself was small and calm, but the planning was not, mostly because my parents, Elaine and Marcus, treat every major decision like it needs their approval stamp or it's automatically wrong. They don't really ask, they inform, then they act shocked if you don't comply. My dad especially talks like the family is a company and he's management. Growing up, it was always, this is how it's going to be, and if you questioned it, you were told you were being disrespectful, ungrateful, or selfish. Things got worse once I moved out and stopped running every choice past them first. 3 days after the wedding, while Noah and I were still sorting through gifts and thank you messages, my mom called me in the middle of the afternoon, full-on panicking. Not quiet crying, loud, frantic, breathless crying. She said they had to move immediately because my dad had a massive fallout with his business partner and they were cutting financial ties. Apparently, some shared accounts were getting frozen and they didn't want anything tied to his name while things were being sorted out. I asked if they were being evicted. She said no. I asked if there was some legal deadline. She said no, but that staying where they were would be a mistake and that they needed to get out before things got messy. Then she dropped the part that mattered to them. They wanted the new lease in my name, not permanently, according to them, just temporarily, just until everything calms down. I said absolutely not. My dad took the phone and said, it's just paperwork. You're not paying for anything. I said, you're asking me to legally attach myself to your housing and whatever fight you're in. He said, you're being paranoid. I said, you're being vague and that's worse. Then he said, we raised you. You should trust us. I said, trust doesn't mean signing contracts for you. That's when he brought up the honeymoon. He said, then you can delay the trip and help us sort this out properly. Not asked, stated. I said, no, I'm not delaying my honeymoon and I'm not putting my name on anything. My mom jumped back in and said, so you're just going to leave us in crisis while you go relax? I said, you're not in crisis. You're avoiding being traceable. She said, you always assume the worst about us. I said, you're asking me to take legal responsibility for your problems. That's not assuming, that's responding. My dad said, after everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you act. I told him, this isn't about sacrifice. This is about liability. He said I was selfish and cold. I said he was reckless and manipulative. Then he said, if you don't help now, don't expect us to be there when your life falls apart. I said, my life is literally starting right now, and you're trying to hijack it. He hung up on me. The next day, it didn't calm down. It spread. My Aunt Denise messaged me on Facebook and said my parents were under unbelievable stress and that I was being cruel by choosing a trip over family stability. I told her they weren't homeless, sick, or stranded. They just didn't want things in my dad's name while he was fighting his partner. She said I didn't understand adult responsibility. I said I understood exactly what signing leases meant. She told me I was acting like a child. I told her she was acting like my parents' personal PR team. She stopped replying. Then my mom started posting vague quotes on Instagram about betrayal and loyalty and how some people forget who was there before they had a new last name. People were commenting hearts and stay strong and family over everything. One of my cousins commented, hope things get better soon, Aunt Elaine. That's when Noah finally lost his patience. He said, they're trying to publicly shame you into giving in. I told him I knew, but every time I thought about responding, I could already hear my dad saying I was being dramatic. That night, my dad sent me a voice message, not emotional, controlled, almost rehearsed. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be. He said if I had any respect, I would step up instead of running off. He said marriages don't last when someone puts fun before family. He said I was already changing and not in a good way. I called him back. He answered immediately, like he was waiting for it. I told him, you don't get to threaten my marriage because I won't clean up your mess. He said, it wouldn't be a mess if you helped. I said, you don't get to trap me with paperwork and guilt and call it helping. He said, you've always been ungrateful. I said, you've always confused control with care. He said, watch your tone. I said, watch your demands. My mom started yelling in the background, saying I was stressing my dad out and that if something happened to him, it would be on me. I said, do not put that on me. She said, then stop being so stubborn. I said, stop trying to use me as legal cover. My dad said, if you walk away now, don't come back asking for anything. I said, I wasn't planning to. He said, good, then we're clear. He hung up again. After that, relatives started reaching out one by one, not in a big group chat, but privately, which somehow felt worse. One said I was tearing the family apart. One said I should be more flexible. One said marriage shouldn't change who I am. I snapped at one of them and said, if marriage means I stop being your emergency exit, then yes, it changed me. They told me I was being dramatic and emotional. I told them they were being lazy and letting my parents bully everyone into fixing their problems. Then my mom messaged me on WhatsApp and said my dad was furious and that I was pushing him to do something drastic. I said, that's not my responsibility. She said, you always say that when things get hard. I said, things are hard because you make them hard. She said, you're acting like you're better than us. I said, I'm acting like an adult who won't sign legal documents under pressure. She said, so your honeymoon matters more than your parents. I said, my future matters more than your convenience. She told me I was selfish and that Noah was clearly influencing me. I said, don't blame my partner for my backbone. She said, you never talked to us like this before. I said, because you never put me in this position before. Then she sent me a screenshot of a message from my dad to his brother saying he was disappointed in the kind of daughter he raised. I told her, sending me guilt screenshots is not going to work. She said, I just want you to understand what you're doing to him. I said, and I want you to understand what you're asking of me. She said, so you're really choosing this hill to die on. I said, you chose it when you tried to put my name on your lease. The day before we were supposed to leave, my dad tried again. He said they found a place, but the landlord needed proof of income and references fast, and that if I just co-signed, everything would be fine. I said no again. He said, then you better be ready for people to know what kind of person you are. I said, if that means I don't sign your contracts, then tell whoever you want. He said, you're going to regret this. I said, I already regret answering the phone. He told me I was cold, selfish, spoiled, and that I only cared about myself. I told him he was controlling, reckless, and desperate to avoid consequences. He said, you think you're so smart now. I said, I think I'm done being useful to you only when you need cover. He hung up. Since then, my mom hasn't called. She just keeps posting vague stuff about loyalty and disappointment and seeing people's true colors. Relatives keep messaging asking if I've calmed down yet. Update 1. 2 days into the honeymoon, my dad emailed me documents. Not asking, not explaining, just attachments, lease application, utility setup forms, a short note at the bottom that said, sign and send back so we can finalize things. No greeting, no context, just instructions. I didn't reply to the email. I messaged him instead and said, I already told you no. He replied, you're letting pride hurt your own parents. I said, you're trying to make me responsible for your decisions. He said, you always turn everything into a fight. I said, you turned it into paperwork. Then my mom messaged me and said my dad's former partner was demanding repayment and that they needed stability immediately. I asked why that meant my name had to be on anything. She said, because you're family and we trust you. I said, trust doesn't cancel consequences. She said I was talking like a lawyer, not a daughter. I said she was acting like a client, not a parent. She said, wow, so that's how you see us now. I said, that's how you're treating me. She told me I was being cold and that I had changed since getting married. I said, I changed when I realized you only call me when you need something signed. She said, that's not fair. I said, then stop sending contracts. She left me on read for hours, then came back with, your dad is furious and hurt. I hope you're happy. I said, I hope you stop trying to guilt me into legal responsibility. That night, my dad messaged Noah directly. He told him that real partners don't let their spouses abandon family and that Noah should be encouraging me to do the right thing instead of supporting my stubborn behavior. Noah replied that the decision was mine and that it wasn't up for debate. My dad wrote back, then she's turning you against us and you're letting her. Noah showed me the messages and asked if I wanted him to block my dad. I said not yet because part of me still wanted this to stop without it turning into a bigger disaster. That didn't happen. The next morning, I woke up to messages from 2 relatives asking if everything was okay because my mom had posted something about losing trust in people you raised. No names, just enough for everyone to know. One relative said my parents were under immense pressure and that I should be more understanding. I replied, understanding doesn't mean signing documents for them. They said, it's temporary. I said, temporary mistakes can last a long time. They told me I was overthinking and being dramatic. I told them my parents were underthinking and being reckless. They didn't answer after that. Then my cousin Riley messaged me privately and asked if I knew my parents were telling people I refused to help because I wanted to enjoy being newly married. I told Riley that they wanted my name on their lease gas and utilities, while my dad was in a financial dispute. Riley said my dad told them I was exaggerating and that it was just temporary paperwork until things settled. I messaged my dad and said, "Stop telling people I'm selfish when you're the one trying to drag me into your financial mess." He replied, "If you weren't selfish, you wouldn't see helping us as a burden." I said, "Helping isn't the same as being legally responsible for your housing." He said, "You're acting like we're criminals." I said, "You're acting like consequences don't exist." He said, "You always think you're smarter than everyone else." I said, "And you always think authority replaces consent." That's when he sent a message that didn't sound angry. It sounded controlled. He said, "Fine, but don't expect us to pretend everything's okay when you come back." I said, "Don't pretend you didn't start this." He didn't reply. For about a day, it was quiet. I thought maybe they were finally handling things on their own. Then my mom started again, but differently. She didn't talk about paperwork. She talked about stress, about sleepless nights, about how my dad wasn't eating, about how everything felt unstable. She kept sending long voice messages, saying she didn't know how much more she could take, and that she never thought her own child would leave her when she was scared. I told her, "Being scared doesn't mean you get to put this on me." She said, "I just need you to be there." I said, "I'm not physically there, and I'm not signing things. That's not changing." She said, "So what? We just deal with this alone." I said, "You're adults." "Yes." She said, "Unbelievable." Then she said, "Your father was right. Marriage already made you selfish." That made me snap. I told her, "No, marriage didn't make me selfish. It just made me stop being your emergency shield." She said I was cruel. I said she was manipulative. She said I was heartless. I said she was desperate to avoid responsibility. She said I was attacking her. I said she was pressuring me. She stopped replying after that and went back to posting vague quotes about betrayal and disappointment. Then my dad tried another angle. He messaged Noah again and told him that if he had any integrity, he would step up and help instead of hiding behind my wife's stubbornness. Noah replied that he wasn't hiding behind me and that my parents' situation wasn't ours to fix. My dad wrote, "Then don't expect to be treated like family anymore." Noah didn't respond to that. Later that day, I got a message from a relative I hadn't spoken to in months, saying my parents were on the edge and that I was being stubborn for no reason. I replied, "It's not for no reason. They want legal protection through me." They said, "Parents do things for their kids all the time." I said, "Parents don't usually ask their kids to take financial risks for them." They said I was acting superior. I said they were acting gullible. They told me I was rude. I said they were intrusive. After that, my phone just kept buzzing with people asking if I was okay, if my parents were okay, if I was going to help, if I was being influenced, if I was angry, if I was holding a grudge. At one point, my dad sent another email with updated documents and wrote, "This is the last time I'm asking." I replied, "You haven't asked once. You've demanded." He wrote back, "Then don't complain about the consequences." I said, "Stop acting like you're punishing me. You're just not getting what you want." He didn't answer that. That night, my mom sent one last message that said, "I never thought you'd be like this." I replied, "I never thought you'd try to use me like this." She didn't respond.
Hold on tight. Before I share the full story, tap that like, subscribe, and let's talk in the comments. Would you have done the same thing?
Since then, there's been nothing directly from them, but the posts keep coming. The comments, the subtle digs, the relatives checking in. It feels like they've stopped trying to convince me and started trying to control the story. Noah keeps telling me that whatever comes next, we'll deal with it together, but I can tell he's getting angry too, especially at my dad messaging him like this is some kind of power contest. I haven't signed anything. I haven't apologized. I haven't backed down. Update 2. 3 days after we got back, I got an email from someone I didn't recognize with my dad CC. Subject line, urgent verification needed for application. It was from a credit verification service. They were asking me to confirm whether I had authorized an application that used my full name, phone number, and employment info as a secondary responsible party. Not co-signer, not guarantor, secondary responsible party. I hadn't applied for anything. I replied, "I did not authorize this. Please withdraw my information immediately." Within 10 minutes, my dad called me. Not texted, called. I didn't answer. He called again. Then my mom called. Then my dad again. I finally picked up and said, "Why is my name on a financial application I didn't approve?" He said, "Relax. It's not finalized. They just need verification." I said, "You used my information without asking." He said, "We had it already." I said, "That's not consent." He said, "Stop talking like you're filing charges." I said, "Stop acting like you didn't just cross a line." Then my mom jumped in on speaker and said, "We're going to tell you, but you get defensive and we needed to move fast." I said, "You mean you needed to move before I could say no again?" My dad said, "You're making this sound worse than it is." I said, "You attached my income to something I didn't agree to." He said, "Because you're stable and we're not right now." I said, "So you decided to borrow my stability without asking." My mom said, "You're twisting this into something ugly." I said, "You made it ugly when you filled out forms with my name on them." My dad snapped and said, "We raised you. We didn't steal from you." I said, "You don't get to use me as collateral just because you're my parent." Then he said, "You always assume the worst about us." I said, "Because every time I say no, you find a workaround." That's when he said, "If you actually cared about us, you wouldn't be trying to sabotage this." I laughed, like actually laughed, and said, "You sabotaged yourselves, and now you're mad I won't clean it up." He hung up on me. 10 minutes later, my Aunt Denise messaged me on Facebook. She said, "Your parents are in a serious situation, and you're making it harder." I replied, "They used my personal info on an application without telling me." She said, "Your dad said it was just to speed things up, and you're overreacting." I said, "Then he can speed things up without my name on it." She said, "You've always been stubborn." I said, "And you've always believed whatever version of the story gets told first." She left me on read. Then my cousin Marco messaged me on Instagram and said, "Did you really tell them you'd rather protect your money than help your own parents?" I said, "Did they tell you they used my identity on paperwork?" He said, "They said you agreed before, and now you're backing out." I said, "Ask them to show you where I agreed." He didn't respond after that. Later that night, my mom sent me a long WhatsApp message. She said she felt like she was losing her daughter over paperwork and that I was being cold and transactional. She said she never thought I'd treat them like strangers. I replied, "Strangers don't use my financial info without permission." "You did." She said, "You don't understand how desperate this feels." I said, "And you don't understand how violating this feels." She said, "So you're really willing to let us fail?" I said, "You are not failing because I won't sign something. You're failing because you built a plan around me without asking." She said, "We needed you." I said, "You needed my name, not me." She didn't reply after that. The next day, Noah told me something that changed the tone of everything. He said someone had called his office asking if he could confirm household income stability because they were finalizing documents. Not my dad, not my mom, a broker. He told them he couldn't confirm anything and that they shouldn't be contacting him at all. When he told me, I felt sick, not panicked, not scared, just angry in that quiet way that sits in your chest and doesn't go anywhere. I messaged my dad and said, "Why are third parties calling my husband about income verification?" He replied, "Because they need to verify household finances." I said, "We are not your household." He said, "Not legally, but practically." I cut him off and said, "Do not finish that sentence." He said, "You're overreacting again." I said, "You involved my spouse without asking." He said, "You're married now. This affects both of you." I said, "Then you should have asked both of us instead of sneaking around." He said, "We were trying to protect you from stress." I said, "By creating a mess that now involves my job, my credit, and my marriage?" He said, "You act like we committed a crime." I said, "You act like boundaries are optional when you're uncomfortable." Then he said, "If you keep blocking every solution, don't be surprised when people start seeing you differently." I said, "Threatening my reputation won't make me sign anything." He said, "I'm just telling you how this looks." I said, "From your version of the story." He didn't respond. That evening, I found out my parents had been telling relatives that I was financially controlling and that Noah and I were cutting them off now that we're married. Not that they used my information, not that I said no, not that they kept pushing after I said no, just that I changed and became stingy. So I posted, not a rant, not screenshots, just a short statement on my own page. I said that I had not agreed to be attached to any applications, that my personal information had been used without permission, and that I had asked for it to be removed. Nothing else. No insults, no names. Within an hour, my mom called me screaming, not crying, not upset, screaming. She said I humiliated them and turned family against them. I said, "You turned family against me first." She said, "You aired private business." I said, "You told people lies about me." She said, "You could have handled this quietly." I said, "I tried." "You went around me." She said, "Now people are asking questions." I said, "Good." She said, "You're being vindictive." I said, "You were being manipulative." She said, "How dare you talk to your mother like that?" I said, "How dare you use my identity and then call me disloyal when I don't accept it?" She told me I was cruel. I told her she was reckless. She hung up. Since then, no one's contacted me directly. The end. NTA full stop. Your parents tried to hijack your credit and name as their personal escape hatch from their own fuck up, then went nuclear with guilt, lies to relatives, identity misuse, and dragging your husband into it when you said no. That's not family in crisis. That's straight up manipulative, boundary violating bullshit. You held the line like a boss. Don't let the flying monkey texts or vague Instagram pity parties make you doubt it. Short verdict. NTA times infinity. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.